Please rise and give your attention to our guest chaplain, Monsignor Stuart W. Swetland, Doctor of Sacred Theology, Donnelly College, Kansas City, Kansas. Guest of Representative Curtis, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Representative Schmoy.
Let us pray. O God, our Creator and Redeemer, we give you thanks and praise for the many and manifold gifts you have bestowed upon us and upon our nation and our state. Bless our president and his cabinet, our governor and mayors, our representatives and senators. We hold up for your protection and care elected and appointed officials and judges at every level. Give them the gifts of knowledge and understanding, wisdom and good counsel. May they always know and put into practice the true common good, being particularly concerned and caring for those on the margins and those whose lives and livelihoods are threatened. You have revealed to us in many ways your preferential option for the poor and the needy, even identifying yourself with the hungry and the thirsty, the sick and the alien, the naked and the imprisoned. May we imitate in every way possible your care and concern, your love and your mercy. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Allegiance of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Has every member had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Messages from the Senate, the clerk will read.
Announcing passage of SB 194 and 237. SB 194 by Committee on Federal and State Affairs, an act concerning real property. SB 237 by Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning family law.
SB 2 appears on the consent calendar for the first day. Is there an objection? Seeing none, it will remain on the consent calendar for the second day. SB 8 appears on the consent calendar for the third day. Is there an objection? Seeing none, it will be advanced to final action. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions, the clerk will read.
SB 8 by Committee on Transportation, an act concerning traffic regulations relating to the duty of drivers approaching stationary vehicles, providing a penalty for unlawful passing thereof.
This constitutes final action on SB 8. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Seeing 10 hands, call of the House is in order. The doorman will close the doors, members will be at their seats, and the clerk will call the roll.
Anderson, Ellis, Martinez, Neighbor, Pickert, Potter Marshall, Rajas, Sawyer, Simmons, Sweely, Tarwater, Vaughn, Wagner, Wilborn.
Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Ellis votes aye. Representative Pickert votes aye. Representative Wagner votes aye. Representative Anderson votes aye. Representative Rogers votes aye. Representative Vaughn votes aye. Representative Sweely votes aye. Representative Tarwater votes aye. Not seeing 10 hands, the call is raised. 119 voting in favor and 0 against the passage of Senate Bill 8, the same having received a constitutional majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes the majority leader for a motion to resolve into the committee of the whole.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself into the committee of the whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading General Orders.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The Speaker appoints Representative Francis to chair the committee of the whole.
Good morning, body. The first item of business is HB 2400. For the purpose of carrying HB 2400, the chair recognizes Representative Williams. Representative Williams, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move the adoption of the committee report. There were not committee amendments. Sorry,
You may
this used to
proceed.
have a different House Bill number. All right, House Bill number 2400 is intended to clarify and expand the classification of agricultural land for property tax purposes, expanding it to include trail rides as a recognized ranching activity. This measure ensures that land used for agritourism activities, including trail rides, will retain its agriculture classification, providing tax benefits to landowners engaged in such activities. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions.
Chair recognizes Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, it is worth noting that this bill originally had a hearing in Commerce under HB 2035. The bill then died due to the time limit and then was reintroduced into tax as HB 2400. So if you want to really track that and follow that, I would recommend you look up 2035 so you can find the information about the conferees and all of that process. I will leave this up to the wisdom of the body because on the one hand, I am a supporter of agro-tourism. On the other hand, it had one proponent, and it's kind of funny how sometimes, you know, for a lot of us, bills will die and we don't get to get them magically reintroduced, and yet here we are. So I guess like some people get special privileges. So fair enough, I guess, and vote your district and vote, you know, really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Does any other member wish to address the bill? Is there any further discussion? If not, if there's no further discussion, Representative Williams, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will address that this bill helps small businesses, and while there may have been only one proponent on the bill, it was a constituent who is directly impacted by the tax burden and her having horse trail rides and what it provides to her community. So with that, I ask you keep small business owners in mind, and I move that when the body rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2400 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Williams to report HB 2400 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Next on the agenda, we have House Bill 2111. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2111, Chair recognizes Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move the adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 2111 is a conservation bill. It is actually a CREP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. And it's basically will do a few things. One, the bill, it will expand the amount of acreage. Currently, there's a cap of 40,000 acres. It will expand that to 60,000. In addition, it will, in the past, producers have had to record their water usage. They had to pump for at least their authorized quantity for 3 out of the 5 years. And now they'll be able to just have to pump a half acre a foot of water. So out of 3 out of the 5 years. And in addition, this bill would allow additional land use practices enrolled in the CREP program. and this would include dry land farming, routine grazing, and limited irrigation if allowed by the NRCS. This program is a state and federal partnership. It is basically a 15-year sign up, just like CRP, and the producers will voluntarily sign their land up. It's not mandated. And once they do sign it up, and it's to target high priority water areas that need to have water conservation, which would be local enhanced management areas and intensive groundwater use areas. And the old part of it was only 25% of the county. There was an amendment that would restrict it to 1,600 acres per county. And the partnership would involve a partnership where the state feds come in, you enroll into that land for 15 years. And once you enroll in it, that water right that you have on that land is permanently retired. So that producer will give up their water right in exchange for that 15 years of payment. And it's incentive based. This will allow program producers to enroll eligible irrigated acres in targeted areas and will allow the state to prioritize those areas that have the greatest impact on limited water. You might ask, well, we're increasing it from 40,000 to 60,000 as of September in 2024. We only had about 24,000 acres signed up. But what we want to do is to make sure that there's targeted areas with this additional practices that allow the farmer to be able to maybe do some dry land farming. And sometimes you realize out there in that country, once they plowed that grass under and started farming it, about 3 years, they lost all their organic content. And so sometimes they have to irrigate when they enroll in this program. They have to, in order to get native grass established, because it's almost pure sand in a lot of cases, they have to actually do some small irrigation. This will allow them to enter into the contract and get a stand of native grass. And we had a lot of proponents. They were primarily Department of Ag, Farm Bureau, Kansas Livestock Association, I believe, Kansas Association of Conservation District, Nature Conservancy were proponents. There was no opponents. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions.
Is there any further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The carrier of the bill did a great job explaining what it does. It's a good bill that will improve our water situation in Kansas, and we urge a support.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the Representative Blex, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the House acts on House Bill 2011, that we move it out favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Blex to report House Bill 2111 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Next item of business today is House Bill 2152. For the purposes of carrying House Bill 2152, the chair recognizes Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House sub for 2152. I'm going to go and explain the problem that we're trying to fix first. The goal of this legislation is to bring more public dollars back into Kansas banks where it can be loaned to Kansas small businesses, Kansas individuals. A recent study by Fort Hays State University found that if we brought $1 billion of Kansas idle funds back into the state of Kansas and Kansas banks, we could see upwards to $130 million in tax growth due to these funds being in Kansas and invested in the state of Kansas. That's quite the multiplier. I believe the study found that a dollar that's invested in Kansas and a Kansas bank is spent 7 times before it even leaves the state.
Let's try to keep it down a little bit.
So last session, I introduced some legislation towards the end of the session. That was kind of the base of what we're looking at today. We held an interim committee and many other meetings and negotiations throughout the summer and fall and winter to get to where we're at today. We introduced the bill in the committee. We had some further negotiations, safe to say, that had to happen then. And we finally got to a place to where all the proponents or opponents of this legislation at the beginning of session are now proponents, and we do not have any opponents. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the major changes in this legislation, what we're doing. 2152 establishes a pooled method to secure government deposits exceeding the FDIC insured limits. That's the $250,000 FDIC insurance. We're requiring that at least 102% of these uninsured funds must be backed by securities. Right now, that's 100%, so we're actually upping it 2% just to be a little safer with our public funds. The state treasurer or a designated administrator will oversee compliance and security of these funds. Financial institutions may substitute securities as long as the collateral remains above the required threshold. I believe at last check, there were 23 other states that actually had a pooled collateral type of process for this. We also added some administrative oversight. State treasurer or designated administrator, like I said, will manage the security system, the 102% threshold. Financial institutions must report public fund deposits monthly. Institutions failing to maintain adequate collateral will now have 5 days to correct the deficiencies or face fines. Currently, there is nothing in law that addresses that. Government entities must also verify the deposit amounts. We also wanted to address something with the investment advisors. So this legislation will prohibit investment advisors from executing bids for public monies, from directly managing those funds. This prevents a conflict of interest and self-dealing within that field. On the compliance front, financial institutions suspected of non-compliance by government entities may file a confidential complaint with the state treasurer's office. We made some changes to existing law. The Pooled Money Investment Board must submit annual reports to government investment policies to the legislature. We're also revising the municipal investment pool fund deposit requirements. And we're going to make some changes to the CD program, including placing a cap of 2.5% on total state funds invested in a single bank account through the state CD program. This will allow our small community banks to have more of a shot at these public funds. We also modify the rate determination by the Director of Investments by allowing awarding investment accounts up to 2% below market value, up to 2%. That's the key there. This provides flexibility in state fund investments while ensuring fair returns. Those are just some of the major changes, Mr. Chairman. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill's fine.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Ho-Heisel. You may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that pithy response from my ranking member. Just so everybody knows, he copycatted off my bill brief, so I'm sure that was the explanation in his caucus as well. But before I make my motion, I want to thank everyone for the hard work in bringing this legislation to a place of consensus. That's including the Kansas Bankers Association, the Community Bankers Association, the League of Municipalities, many local governments, and the State Treasurer's Office. The State Treasurer was a big help in getting a good compromise on this legislation. Investing public funds locally allows banks to loan those dollars to Kansas borrowers, fueling economic growth, increasing income, and generating additional tax revenue for both local governments and state governments. This legislation simplifies and strengthens the process for banks and government entities to work together to invest Kansas dollars. I've never just painted by the numbers, but when we do, we need to make it count. By returning $1 billion to local investment, this measure could generate up to $130 million in additional revenue for Kansas state and local governments. In short, we are keeping Kansas dollars working in Kansas for Kansans. And with that, Mr. Chair, when the committee rises and report HB 2152 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoheisel to report HB 2152 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Next item of business today is Senate Bill 14. For the purpose of carrying Senate Bill 14, the chair recognizes Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move the committee report.
You've heard the motion to amend the committee, or to adopt the committee report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate Bill 14 would amend and allow for the establishment of continuing appropriations from existing appropriations to carry forward in the event that the legislature passes an appropriations bill, the governor vetoes such bill in its entirety, and the veto is not sustained. So, or the veto is sustained, I'm sorry. And so if in that case, if that happens over and over again in a particular legislative session and we end up adjourning sine die, then the last year's budget minus those one-time expenses that would be agreed upon by the Director of Budget and the Director of Legislative Research would go into effect as a continuing resolution until a budget could be reached. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Is there any discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Kansas Legislature requires the governor to present a budget to the legislature each year. The legislature must then pass a budget annually. The legislature has always been able to pass a budget, including this year with a new legislative budget process, a more compressed time schedule, and a shortened calendar session. I do not see how this legislation from the Senate is necessary, given that we have always been able to pass a budget each year. This bill will do nothing but give legislative leadership an incentive to fail to act to pass a budget. SB 14 would bring the absolute worst in terms of negotiating. For the better part of a decade, we have seen the U.S. Congress fail to pass individual spending bills on time and instead resort to continuing resolutions to continue to fund government operations. We are watching the dysfunction of the funding and being on the brink of closing the government, and now you're going to fund it and you rush, and yet you have all this chaos and people upset all the time. I do not see a need for us to follow this behavior that Congress is doing, and we seem to copy. Last year, we voted ourselves a rather substantial pay increase. Instead of introducing SB 14, we need to think in terms of the legislature continuing to work with the governor to pass a budget, which we must do, and not result to stalling. And the governor could stall as well as the legislature could do that. But if you have to pass a budget, we have done it. We have never not provided a budget. This is not needed. I cannot support this legislation, and I urge all of you to think carefully about it and join me in not voting for Senate Bill SB 14. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Helgerson.
Would the carrier of the bill stand for a few questions and a discussion?
Certainly.
You know, we haven't had a chance to talk very often. Okay, can you want to explain why we're doing this?
Well, as you know, we've been here sometimes up until almost the time that a budget has to be introduced. And we've run into the situation where we're running up to that deadline and we just end up passing something and in order to make sure that the appropriations are done so that we won't have furloughs, things like that. So this would give kind of a backstop and say, all right, if an agreement cannot be made by, June 15th, June 30th, then the former appropriations will go into effect until an agreement could be made.
Is it fair to say this is like, in the past, it's been one big game of chicken?
Okay.
House leadership versus the governor? Is that fair? Well, you and I don't have a whole lot to do with it, right?
Right.
Okay. So they would argue about some points. Okay, if they come to loggerheads and we have a continuing resolution, what happens then after that? How long does it go?
It would go until a new budget was created. My anticipation would be that if we would leave here sine die without a budget, which would revert to the old budget, we would most likely be called back to a special session. I would assume by the governor, or we could even, let's say it's the other way around, we could call ourselves back to a special session.
Okay, but it would go on for a second and even a third year if we haven't reached it.
Well, I suppose it possibly could.
Okay, I'll give you the choice of answering this question or not. Is this a way of trying to control the budget? Really, if we look at the pragmatics of it, if one side is trying to raise the budget, and the other side is trying to control it, it's a way of trying to hold it to the present levels.
I think it's a way to make sure that we don't pass something that is not a great budget just simply because we are running out of time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I miss working with you in the same way this year.
I do too.
Well, okay, so everyone understands the governor and leadership had opposition on the way the budget was put together in the last few years. And as a result, we got a long time, we were delayed in reaching some agreement. I'm betting that most of you believe that this is a way of controlling the budget. But let me give you a different scenario so you have at least the full discussion. What if some radical, crazy Democrat got in who wanted to cut the budgets? You know the guy. He could instead reach a loggerheads and then go into all of the social programs that you have passed or all of the programs that have been questionable to this side and say, we have a budget shortfall. We are going to start eliminating all of those programs. You think it might not happen? It's very possible. That is the problem with this. We are turning over our constitutional obligation. Our constitutional obligation to sit in this chamber and say we believe in this budget or we believe in these projects and we believe that if the governor's wrong or another legislator's wrong, we are going to testify and work against it and vote against it every day of the session. And if we expect to have a continuing resolution that'll save us, well, I don't think it will. Much more, especially with the increase in salary that we have, we shouldn't get paid for it, nor should the governor. So I have an amendment. Sorry about the delay, but this is pretty simple to explain. If we reach a point where there's not agreement with the legislature and the governor, then we don't get paid and the governor doesn't get paid from that point. That's where our constitutional obligation is. I think that's only fair. Happy to stand for questions.
The amendment is short. The clerk will read.
As amended by House Committee on page 1 in line 12, after the period by inserting notwithstanding the provisions of any statute to the contrary. If the provisions of this section take effect, then the legislature and the governor shall not receive compensation for such period of time until an appropriations bill providing for appropriations for the ensuing fiscal year or years for state agencies is passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, and takes effect.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Hoffman.
Ask you a couple questions. So this amendment would not allow the legislature or the governor to get paid?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
We're going to cut their budgets, both of them.
Okay. Well, I think that's the magic word, that if both groups cannot come to an agreement, then neither group should maybe get paid. So I would urge you to support this amendment.
Chair recognizes Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment, and I think it also gives an example of the practical way that this bill would be implemented. For example, if it passes, it's into law by the end of session. If we were to enact SB 14 and go back to the 2025 budget, that is the year that the legislature increased our legislative pay. So that is done through statute, and we would have to get paid. So the $7.3 million appropriation that is in for an enhancement request for this year, it doesn't exist yet. That legislative pay plan doesn't exist. So we would still have to come up with, as the legislature, $7.3 million to give us that pay and make cuts in other areas in order to do that. Same for any agency. If we, for example, did the $60 million for the Astra Fund, and we enact SB 14, it gets vetoed, sustained. It would be similar to this example of legislative pay, where we have to come up with that amount of money in those agencies in order to adopt it. So I support this because $7.3 million for legislative pay is pretty small compared to what a lot of our other agencies are going to have to do. I think this amendment gives us an incentive to get back quickly and resolve whatever issues we have between the legislature and a governor in order to have a budget, because it is our duty to pass a budget. And that's why I'm going to support this, because the underlying bill I have major problems with, but I think this does give us some more reason to get it resolved quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion? If there is no further discussion, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
There was one point that I'm not sure about, it was asked to me behind, and that is, what happens if the legislature and the governor come to an agreement? Do you get the back pay that, in that period? I never clarified that with the revisor, So if the bill goes to conference and the Senate doesn't accept this right away, then I think that that should be clarified. Is that fair? Okay. So I move my motion.
Heard the motion by Representative Helgerson to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Representative Helgerson, you still have the floor.
I would like to mention one other thing, or two other things. First, there is serious questions about any lawsuits that happen, and there will probably be several with this bill, especially on school finance. So however you feel about this, be prepared. Second, after that chance that I had of having almost a unanimous amendment, I got one on Medicaid expansion. Just kidding. Thank you very much.
Speaking to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will the carrier of the bill stand for a few questions? Hi. Oh, one of the questions I had was asked earlier, and it was kind of answered. I just want clarification. So there's no time limit, as I read it, on how long a continuing appropriation could be in effect. Is that right?
Right. I mean, when we would come back for the next session or a special session, then it would just continue to be worked on. My assumption would be we'd come back for a special session. But let's say that we don't. We come back in January, we work on a new budget. If that budget passes, then that's the budget that becomes law.
And if that budget is vetoed and the veto is sustained, then we're still under the continuing appropriation from 2 years prior.
We are, but you know, I can't imagine that we would get into a situation where that's happened. That is an awful lot of years of not working together to make a budget. So I just can't see that happening.
I agree. It is a lot of number of years. It's also a lot of number of years we wouldn't get paid under the amendment. that
That's
just went
true.
on. Okay, but I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Congress does this all the time with their continuing resolutions, right? They go from year to year.
Right, if I might though, the difference is, and this was put on in committee because I had the same concerns that you had when it came into committee. And we added in committee that a budget has to be passed by this body. It has to go to the governor, and then the governor has to veto it, and we're not able to sustain it. So, you know, in all fairness, we're actually doing what we're supposed to be doing. We just can't come up with an agreement.
Versus passing a continuing appropriation.
Which what?
Gotcha.
That's,
Okay. I have a few more questions, so don't go far.
Okay.
You did answer my question about what happens to one-time expenditures. If I understand correctly, they would just kind of disappear under the continuing appropriation? Like
Right.
they wouldn't be expended a second time?
They wouldn't be expended a second time, and it would be a decision between the budget director and the director of legislative research. They would agree that, hey, these are one-time expenditures, and then it would not be, much like what was, you know, when we introduced our budget, there was a lot of one-time spends that were taken out of that.
Sure. Right, that happens every year, which is why it's important to pass a budget every year. Okay, so a lot of the state budget is things that we are obligated to fund, right? Public education, caseloads. As I read the bill summary and the bill language, and I haven't had more than 6 hours or so to think about this, I think it says that the Secretary of Administration can decide to reduce state general funds in order to come into alignment with reduced federal funds. But what happens when we need to increase that? So let's take an example of, I have two examples in mind. One would be, let's say we have a lot of people, we have a spike year that elderly Kansans are going into nursing homes. Medicaid pays for 65% of nursing care in this state. So what happens if we find ourselves in a situation where we have an increase in caseloads?
Yeah, let me look here to see if it says, well, that's loud, isn't it? I'm not sure. I'd have to ask about that. It does talk about reduction, such state, reduction shall be implemented by the, so I'm not sure if it would, if there were an increase would be allowed. Probably wouldn't be allowed.
And does the same go for school finance formula when, if we have an uptick in K-12 education?
Yeah, I would assume. I'd have to double check, but I would assume it would be the same. Because it would go back to last year's. Now, it does give the ability for the budget director to borrow against other funds in order to make sure that funds are available. But those have to be paid back.
Exactly, right. Yeah, I did see the borrowing language. It's worrisome for a couple of reasons. One, it has to be paid back, and two, it just seems like kind of a messy way to fund things we're obligated to fund. One last question for you. So you mentioned, the way you see this playing out is a veto is sustained and we're called back into special session to resolve the budget issue because we needed more time. We have 90 days in our session to make a budget. If that isn't satisfactory, how long do you think we'll need to be in special session? And what cost would be associated with bringing us back into special session to do the job we didn't get done in the first 90 days?
Well, since most of the cost is our salaries, we wouldn't be getting paid while we were in the special session, I would assume. So, I mean, that's one thing. But, I mean, we just have to, it's very possible that the same budget would be introduced and maybe some changes made. I don't know what the total cost would be. It's
Okay.
whatever a special session is.
Thank you for answering my questions. Body, I have to say this bill is very concerning. I think as you've heard through the discussion here, there are major unanswered questions about what this does in terms of funding the basic obligations we have in terms of K-12 education and our caseloads, let alone other questions that are still unanswered. I think this is a disincentive for us to do our work during the 90 days we're here and get a budget done. And I think it frankly brings DC-style budgeting in many ways to Kansas. And I don't think this is necessary. I don't think that it's ever been necessary. I think sometimes deadlines are the things we need to get things done. And I would urge you, given all the uncertainty and the danger here, to vote no.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree that it would be messy. It would not be certainly the ideal situation. Thus, the reason why, I hope that it's never put into effect. But I do think that having some sort of a stopgap for our state workers to know that, hey, if we don't get it done, they're not going to be furloughed on June 15th or June 30th. So I do think that there's that we need to look at. So, Mr. Chairman, I move that when the House rises and reports, it reports Senate Bill 14 favorable for passage as amended.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoffman to report SB 14 favorably as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Next item of business today is SB 105. For the purpose of carrying SB 105, the chair recognizes Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were committee amendments, and I move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion to adopt the committee report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 105 concerns the temporary filling of vacancies to the positions of State Treasurer, Insurance Commissioner, and U.S. Senator. It passed the Senate 31-9 in February and is the Senate version of House Bill 2057. This bill is timely. This bill is necessary. 8 times in the last 100 years, our state has had unexpected vacancies to fill, 6 by resignations, 2 by death. On January 29th, the crash of Flight 5342 from Wichita to Washington, D.C. brought to life how suddenly life can be cut short. This time, it was figure skaters and business people. It could have just as well been delegates from the Kansas congressional or Senate delegation. In the case of the U.S. Senate, one Senate seat can affect the entire control of that chamber.
Keep it down.
Thank you. Our current system has one person, the governor, given total authority over this process. Senate Bill 105 provides wise and appropriate checks and balances. In Kansas history, we have had governors, both Republicans and Democrats, who have taken the opportunity to flip a seat to their own party, ignoring the will of the voters from the prior election. Senate Bill 105 ends this by mandating that the replacement must be of the same party as the incumbent, but also has to have been a member of such party for the prior 2 elections. So a politically motivated party switch is precluded. Senate Bill 105 makes a 12-member selection committee chosen by the majority and minority leadership of the House and Senate to choose the 3 nominees. These 12 members shall represent all 4 congressional districts in both parties. Within 10 days, the House and Senate shall adopt the 3 names sent to the governor or ask for the committee to reconsider. The governor, whoever he or she may be at that time, has then 3 days to make the final pick. This method of having legislative input into the selection of a replacement for these important governmental positions has successfully been done by multiple states in the past. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Chair recognizes Representative Blake Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, appreciate the bill carrier bringing this bill. I do have an amendment.
The amendment is long. Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to, at the end of the day, leave this to the will of the body, but I wanted to make sure that the body had options when it came to this piece of legislation. So with the current Senate Bill 105, the way it's written is that this joint committee of 12 members will select 3 individuals to send to both chambers in order to pass a concurrent resolution. Well, that's great if you're one of the 12 individuals that are selected to be on the joint committee. It's not so great if you're not, because then you're kind of given the options that are kind of given to you, and that's just where it's at. Additionally, while I might be the Speaker Pro Tem right now, I have not always been in leadership. And I have sat in the seats where I do not get one of these special appointments. And so all of these appointments for the 12 members are made up of House and Senate leadership on both sides of the aisle. And while they might pick a various group of people, they have to pick from certain congressional districts, I feel like there is something missing. And that component was held within House Bill 2057. This amendment will change the process. Instead of the joint committee selecting 3 individuals and then us passing a concurrent resolution based off their recommendation, instead what it does is it returns us back to what the legislature used to do prior to the 17th Amendment. Now, it's been modified due to the 17th Amendment in this process. The joint committee would select 5 individuals to send out to a joint session where senators and representatives have the ability to have their voices heard on why a person would be good or bad for the desired position that we were attempting to fill. So this would allow all of us to have a voice. This would allow all of us to then have a vote, to go from 5 candidates to 3 candidates. Additionally, this amendment makes it that if we are not in session, that under Senate Bill 105, the 12 people get to select the 3 people and send them straight to the governor. This amendment will allow for a 7-day period as soon as the vacancy is announced for either the governor or the legislature to call ourselves back for a special session in order to do this process. Again, allowing the legislature, our body, both chambers, to have a say in who these individuals are in order to take 2 of our heads of state position or even a U.S. Senate position as well. Additionally, in Senate Bill 105, it has it to where the permanent chairmanship is given to the Senate President. Under this amendment, it'll make it to where every time this committee meets in order to fill a vacancy in the future, it will alternate the chairmanship between the Senate and the House, making it fair to both chambers on who chairs this committee. Let me see if I missed anything else here. Additionally, on Senate Bill 105, pages 3, lines 21 through 27, makes it to where anybody can become a candidate as long as they meet the requirements of being a state resident and a part of that party for at least 2 election cycles. The problem with that is that we could end up having 500 people decide that they want to be a candidate for any of these positions. We could have 1,000 people. You know, I think you have to have some form of figuring out how we are going to go through this process. Otherwise, this 30-day period is going to be taken up. If you have 500 people and they all are required to give them a public hearing, well, are we going to start having hearings where we're giving people 1 or 2 minutes? Well, that's not acceptable. And so this modifies it to how House Bill 2057 had it, in that all 165 members of this legislature are allowed 1 nomination, and they submit that nomination to the board. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will go ahead and stand for questions.
Is there objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? Seeing none. Are you ready for questions, Representative Carpenter? Okay. Representative Wagner.
I have some questions for the carrier of the amendment.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Pro Tem, the amendment you're proposing is basically the wording, or some of the wording that we had in House Bill 2057. Am I correct?
Yes, where Senate Bill 105 was silent or didn't add specifics in certain areas, I went in with what was the version of House Bill 2057 and basically added what we were doing over there into this bill.
Okay. And so is it exactly what had been in 2057 as far as, or have you revised that slightly?
I asked the revisor to, I mean, the amendment is kind of long, but if I asked the revisor to basically take the exact same process. So what would happen is the joint committee picks 5 people. We do a joint session. We narrow it down to 3 people. There are some rules that would apply within that process. If somebody wasn't selected in that process, there is an opportunity to do a motion to reconsider on that person only once. If in that process we cannot come up with 3 individuals as a joint body, it goes back to the joint committee and they then produce different names. Some of them could be similar. If there's people who want to support one person, they secured the amount of votes that they needed, but we still didn't have 3, then at that point the joint committee sends us additional names for us to hopefully pass and whittle it down to those 3 people to send to the governor.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Body, the House elections, you know, we had House Bill 2057. We passed it favorably for passage in committee. So we have heard this language. We are officially leave it to the will of the body on this. My only sort of comment is Senate Bill 105 has a somewhat simpler process as far as on selection. But again, there's a lot of things that the speaker has mentioned as far as the additional steps that this would take. But again, it's just kind of a judgment call, and we would certainly just leave it to your best judgment.
Chair recognizes Representative Haskins.
Would the carrier, the speaker, stand for a couple questions for clarification? Thank you for coming up here.
Yes, sir.
All right, so House Bill 2057 is the base for this amendment. So a couple questions. Does this amendment increase the number of individuals on the joint committee? Does that stay at 12?
It does stay at 12. In the original 2057, it was at 14, and we did not specify who had the appointment authority, so it would have been the Speaker and the President at that point in time. So I did leave Senate Bill 105 untouched in that regard, in that section.
Okay. And now, with the concurrent resolution, if I'm reading this correctly, instead of recommending 3, they're now identifying 5. Is that correct? Similar to what House Bill 2057 did, right?
Yes. So the joint committee would select 5, and then we'd all meet with the House and Senate as a joint session to determine of those 5 who are the 3 that we want to put to move on to the governor.
Okay, and is the joint session, is that a shall or may have a joint session?
As it is written, I believe it's a may call forward, but why would you not call it if this is the process, if this is the law for us to select vacancy positions? So I did read the may in there earlier, but I would be very surprised if the legislature did not do its job on wanting to select for any of these three positions.
Okay, and last questions, and thank you. This is, I mean, helpful. I think helpful for everybody is, so if there is a disagreement, like in Senate Bill 105, if there's not someone in that list that the body agrees with, Senate Bill 105 says the joint committee has to reconvene and start the process over. Is that still the case?
So towards the back end of this amendment, it talks about how if the joint session rejects or cannot come up with three nominees, it goes back to the joint committee, and then they, at that point, they can either produce same names or similar or different names to send back out to the joint session for us to reconsider at a later date.
Okay, hey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, there's a few issues now. In House Bill 2057, when I was reviewing that, there's obvious gaps. And though I appreciate the work that the speaker is putting into this, and I always will like a House bill over a Senate bill anyways, the point is that the key is we go from 3 nominees to 5 nominees, and we send to the governor 3 nominees. So what happens, the Senate says, I like these 3, and the House says, no, I like these 3. What do we do now? Well, now we have gridlock. So now it goes back to the committee to revisit this. So the number of 5 itself is problematic because it's setting you up for a conflict or a gap in who will be selected. The other issue about this is that it does state may have a joint session. And the speaker did bring up that this is sensitive, because if it is may, that means we don't have to have a joint session. And it's left to, well, it's common knowledge, it's rational that we have a joint session. But no, this is the letter of the law, and I've learned in this committee, and especially serving on judiciary, that words do matter. And so may means we don't have to do it. Well, if we don't have to do it, now what? We have a list of 5 nominees, and now we send it back to the session of the Senate and the session of the House, and we're back into that gridlock. The last thing about this is the fact that if there is not an agreement, which is how the amendment is defined right now, there are holes, it's going to go back to the joint committee, and that's just going to repeat the process. And it's $35,000 every time they meet. That's a lot of change there. So I would encourage us not to adopt this amendment, though I appreciate the effort of bringing it in, but there are too many questions, too many holes, and we should just discuss Senate Bill 105 as is. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? If there is no further discussion, Representative Blake Carpenter, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with the previous representative, you'll hear a lot of those similar points as to why you should not vote for Senate Bill 105 anyway. So I would take that into consideration prior to this vote. Here's the thing. We can make this very simple. Do you want 12 people to have all the power, to have all the voice in that process? Or do you want to have some form of ability to come up and debate these individuals that are going to be potentially leading our state or in our nation's capital? You know, the hardest things in life are often the most worthwhile. And while this process might be a little bit more cumbersome than what is currently laid out in Senate Bill 105, I would argue that you have more power under this version of it. And I will leave it up to the will of the body, of the committee. I mean, either way, I'm overall supportive of this concept, and I'm just trying to make the bill a little bit better and would appreciate your vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move my amendment.
Heard the motion by Representative Carpenter to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Okay, it looks like we're back on the bill. Representative Haskins?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, the speaker kind of gave away my thunder, so forget that he kind of said that so I can talk to you for a little bit here. So I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 105 as amended, and it addresses a new gubernatorial process. Now, first, that process has been in place for 100 years, and not once has it been demonstrated as an issue other than the disagreement of who was replaced the vacant position. And also, it should be noted that the Pew Research Center states that 34 states, including Kansas, has the same appointment. So I'll be brief as I can. There are three main issues that I talked about. First, the cost. Every time we do this, it's $35,173 as a fiscal note, and it's also worded that it will increase 3% annually. Now, that includes salary, travel expenses, and administrative overhead for a committee that is largely redundant. So we've created a bureaucratic system for a process that was working so we can have an assurance that the right person is getting in place. Instead of funding education, infrastructure, or public safety, where this money could go to, this is where we've decided we need to spend our time. There is a delay in the vacancy. This committee cannot be formed until the vacancy happens. And then you have 10 days before the committee is formed, and then the committee has 30 days, and then we would have an additional time. And if it's a disagreement, it goes back, starts over. So you're looking at a minimum of 30 days to, if it's close to December 31st, it could be 100 days before we have this position filled. We could fill it right now, or we could spend $40,000 and take 100 days to fill a very important. And at a time in which we do need our representation in Washington and our checkbook balance. And I addressed the gridlock between the two houses. Even with the amendment, specifically with the May, there will be the potential for gridlock, slowing down the process, costing it more. And the primary issue for this is that we want to make sure that the person filling the position meets certain requirements, but most importantly, is affiliated with the party that they held the position with. So we want to appoint somebody that was a member of the party, but meet the same requirements. And with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears long. Would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, I would. Basically, what it does is erases the committee, the redundant process, the length of time to fill an important position, and just states, Governor, you have to use the requirements that are in the bill, but you must appoint somebody from the party that position was last held. That's the primary argument and issue of frustration. That's it. Doesn't cost us any money, keeps the same process that's been there for 100 years, and it lets us move on and get along with more important issues. That's all it does.
Is there objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? Seeing none. Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Wagner.
Colleagues, we had this amendment in committee. And again, I appreciate the bringer, even though we consider it unfriendly. He's a friendly person himself. But here's the rub of the matter. You know, simply by having it where the governor has to pick it from somebody from the same party, you know, is no guarantee that you're going to get a representative or a person who actually, I'm going to say, fulfills the gist of the party. I mean, I can give you examples as far as you have persons in the most recent election where they were Republicans for Kelly. where you could take somebody who was a member of that group who is technically a Republican, but in no way embodies, the Republican philosophy, which is what the people of the state had voted for when the position, again, presuming it was a Republican, had filled. You can think of the example of perhaps Barbara Bollier, who was in the Senate, where people at a certain point have flipped parties, and yet at the time the selection is being made, they are still a member of the incumbent party. So having the legislature involved in it is a necessary check and balance to the procedure to make sure that you have somebody who is legitimately representative of the party. I think leaving it just to the governor to pick at their whim, as it been, with their arbitrary power, with no check or balance, I think you still have a very good potential for mischief. So I urge you to vote it down.
Chair recognizes Representative Susan Ruiz.
I have a question for the carrier of the amendment.
I haven't been asked a question, so go ahead.
All right. So with your amendment,
Yeah.
The governor would replace the person from the same party. So let's say, for example, that a certain senator living in Western Kansas that lives in a cabin somewhere is appointed to the current presidential administration, to the cabinet, or in some kind of form, that his seat would be vacant, right? And so if he's appointed like within the month, his remaining time, a person would be would be appointed to serve in that seat, and they would only have the time that's left under the term. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Am I thinking right?
Yeah, that's a interesting example. But yes, that would be correct. There are other issues in place, like if it's May 1st, then it holds on to we'll do the primary and special election. If it's close to December 31st, they'll hold off and do a general election. If it's in 90 days of December 31st. So there's a short window that this appointment would happen. But yeah, that is correct.
But they would not be serving the full term.
They would not be serving the full term until the next even number election comes up.
Okay, and then they would have, if they wanted to stay in that seat, they would have to run for that seat.
That is my understanding of the bill. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I like this amendment for that reason. Then the people of Kansas get to choose who is going to represent them. The person is only an interim person. And then the people in that district, rightly so, should have a say-so. And so there's your checks and balance. If you don't like the person that the governor might have chosen, then the people of Kansas in that district get to vote on the person that they want in their district. And I think that's the best of all worlds. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Carlin.
Yes, I have a question for the carrier of the amendment. Actually, I would have asked the carrier of the bill, but maybe you can answer the question. Does the bill, as presented to us, have criteria established so that the recommendation process could actually ask someone, were you a Democrat that just became a Republican, or vice versa? Were you a Republican that just became a Democrat?
Yeah, it does, and that's a really good question. And I'm not.
It does or does not? I'm sorry.
It does. And I'm not removing that. The requirements to fill the position, to be nominated as the bill states, is one, they have to meet federal and state requirements, which includes they have to be a resident of the state of Kansas. And the second one, in the Senate bill's version, they had to be a member of the party for 6 years. But in committee, we reduced that to 2 even number general elections, which if you did the math, that would be 3 years. So you have to, currently you have to be a member of the party for 3 years and a resident of Kansas, and that stays.
Okay, well, that's a little bit better than being able to say, somebody just re-registered last week.
Right.
But I did serve on a board for the state where a member of the Board of Indigence Defense became, became a Democrat, so he could be appointed because it was a Democrat opening. And we didn't have any problem with that. He served just as well as somebody else would have. But I see this as a way of trying to tie people's hands politically. And gosh, the 3 years helps a lot, but I don't think.
Let's stay on the amendment.
Thank you. Pardon me?
Chair, I was just saying stay on the amendment. I think that's in the underlying bill.
Yeah, that's because I couldn't ask. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Hey there, body. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to offer again a point of clarification here. Someone would have had to have been a member of the Republican Party for 3 years, and it is unfair and inaccurate to imply that any Republican that had supported a Democratic governor isn't a real Republican. I represent plenty of those people. I knock on their doors. I talk to them frequently, and I do not think that party purity is an appropriate way to look at things. Moderate Republicans deserve representation. They should not be spoken ill of, and knock it off. Thank you.
Or anybody else like? Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Hoskin, you may close.
Mr. Chair, colleagues, thanks for the opportunity to carry the amendment and for the discussion here. I'm trying to save taxpayers' dollars and get us on with our lives and address other issues. This just cuts to the quick. And also my colleague just mentioned that this is not for current, this is for future, all right? This has been in place for 100 years. So we should be taking this pretty serious anytime we change something that's 100 years old. So I move and close my amendment, and I hope for your support.
You've heard the motion by Representative Haskins to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Division has been called for. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Has every member had an opportunity to vote? The clerk will close the roll and take the tally. 22 having voted in favor and 81 against. The motion fails. Representative Haskins, you still have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues, and Mr. Chair, I apologize we didn't support what you said first, but, we move on with this now. All right, so now we're talking inefficiency. Let's talk inefficiency and redundancy here. Let's take a look at the committee alignment here. The committee alignment is something that they state is to enhance accountability, is to enhance representation, is to enhance giving you a voice. It also states that this is something that will reflect what Kansans vote on. The problem is, and what is not brought up, is that if you are a member of an independent party, the nomination should be of an independent affiliation. The governor can also make a decision on who fills that spot. Last time I checked, the state is split up into thirds overall. You have those that are Republican, those on Democrat, and those that are unaffiliated. This is, without doubt, an erosion of the authority of the governor, whether it's today's governor or the governor 20 years from now. So we need to take it serious. It also doesn't fully represent the Joint Committee of Kansas. February 1st, 2025, Secretary of State says we have 2,595,000 registered voters. Of that, 45.19% are Republican. Oh, this hurts. 25.17% are Democrats, and a significant portion of unaffiliated voters consisting of 28.19%. Now, if you look at the committee, how it's broken up right now, the majority party has 10 members. The minority party has 2. Now imagine you're playing sports, I don't know, private institution versus public. I've been in committees like that, in which one team has far more resources than the other. Now, is that a fair representation of our state? 10-2? Now, in committee, and this is another amendment I had in committee, the argument was, well, one day, the Democrat Party, which would be a glorious day, could be in the majority. And all of this could be on the cool side right here. It's cool because it's north, not socially. Well, we'll leave that up to the body. If that is the case, I wonder how you would feel. 10-2. Doesn't seem like it's a fair representation. It seems like it is, we have an agenda, we want this certain person to go through, and we're going to do a smoke and mirror to say that everybody has a vote. But we have a committee of 10-2. Now, I can read the room, and we'll move on with this, so I do have an amendment to help.
The amendment is short. The clerk will read.
As amended by House Committee on page 2 in line 18 by striking 12 and inserting 15, in line 34 by striking 1 member and inserting 2 members, in line 35 by striking and, in line 36 by striking 1 member and inserting 2 members, in line 37 after representatives by inserting and 11, 1 member appointed by the governor who shall not be affiliated with any political party authorized by law to nominate candidates by primary election.
Representative Haskin, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, as you remember, the speaker came up here and said that House Bill 2057 had 14 members. 14 members. This group has 10. So what I'm trying to do with this one is to bring it back to the 14, in which there are now 4 minority members, and you still have the 10 majority. But keep in mind that this is an erosion of the governor's ability to appoint that has been in place for 100 years. And this ability to appoint is something that out of everybody who's going to be sitting on the committee is from someone that the whole state voted on. So in light that the governor's voice is no longer in the nomination process, and in light that we don't have all representations of voters in Kansas, the unaffiliated, this adds a governor's nomination with the condition that the member has to be unaffiliated with an elected political party. That brings us to 15. Now, I've served on a lot of faculty committees in my time, and I assure you, you must have an odd number because not everybody gets along. So that also adds a deciding vote. So it takes the group from 12, a 10-2, to 10, 4, and 1 with a deciding vote, a group of 15. I close my amendment.
Would anybody like to speak to the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Wagner.
Colleagues, I would urge you to vote this amendment down. We did hear this in committee, are basically the same fundamental. I think I would highlight in the section 1 where it says, the preceding election, such office was not registered with any political party, then any suitable person who is a resident of the state may be appointed pursuant to sections 2 through 4. We we actually have not had, I think, in the last 100 years, for any of these positions, someone from an independent party. I don't think this is just really a means to just change the format of the committee to make it more favorable to the governor, whoever him or her may be. The point, of course, being that we're trying to get the legislature to have this check and balance to the governor's pre-existing authority to make the final choice, and I do urge you to vote this down.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Haskins, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Folks, I'm not talking today. I'm not talking after session, which, by the way, was an amendment that was put on in elections, that it was put on register. I'm not talking about anything other than for Kansas and what's been in place for 100 years. I've visited with the governor. We have talked about this. This amendment is something that can be improved on the current process that you have listed. And also, it mirrors what we did in House Bill 2057, except I added one more important character. That is the independent voter, the unaffiliated voter, which represents close to a third of our Kansans. And with that, I close my amendment. Please vote for it.
Heard the motion by Representative Haskins to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Nays appear to have it. The nays do have it. The motion fails. Representative Haskins, you still have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, folks, now I'm upset. I mean, I've tried two good amendments to help us, and now all I hear is that you don't care about the minority vote. You don't care about unaffiliated. We view that this is the most important issue right now, that we don't need to talk about food deserts in Kansas. We don't need to talk about the daycare gap. We don't need to talk about why our college students are leaving Kansas and draining the college brain. No, what we need to talk about is, according to this bill, is who is going to fill a position that I guess must be coming soon. I don't know. I would like to have a conversation about that, but I could tell, I can read the room when people start falling asleep.
Further discussion on the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask a question of the carrier real quick? Thank you. In your opening statement, you said that this bill was timely. Can you explain why this bill is timely?
I was referencing the crash of the airliner going from Wichita to Washington, D.C.
Okay, thank you. I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
As amended by House Committee on page 5, following line 20, by inserting new section 8, the provisions of sections 1 through 4 and section 7, and the amendments to KSA 25-101B and amendments thereto, and KSA 40-106 and amendments thereto shall expire on January 1st, 2027, and by renumbering sections accordingly.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I bring this amendment, putting my amendment streak at risk, so you know it's important. So even with the Speaker Pro Tem's amendment that he put on, this actually creates a very big and onerous and new process. And I understand what you guys are trying to do, but just quite frankly, like from a practical standpoint, it might not work. And in doing so, putting on a sunset of January 1, 2027, in my opinion, just kind of gives us as a legislature a way out of this onerous process without anybody needing to expend political capital. If it doesn't work, we can just let it expire after this governor's term is done. And so that's the intent of this amendment. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Wagner.
Colleagues, this bill, I urge you to reject the amendment. You know, the bill is dealing with a fundamental issue of selection. The topic doesn't go away whether there's a new governor, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. And I would think, we have the ability to change any law further down the road if we need to. I think having a sunset on this is not helpful, and I urge you to vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm back. What a surprise, this amendment here. I will just tell you this, that I support it, and I think it gives you what you want, but it lets us go back and support and recognize our forefathers that have been in place for 100 years. It also it goes all the way up to our next gubernatorial vote. I like it. Let's do it.
Chair recognizes Representative Estes.
Thank you. I oppose this amendment because it's not about one governor. And there's actually been times in history where there were governors, at least one governor in my lifetime, that I didn't appreciate the way that they handled the vacancy. The resignation came in after filing deadline. So that governor thought, oh, I get to appoint. They made an appointment thinking that the next election would not be held. And it turned out to be very wrong because a Secretary of State had the courage to say, nope, we've got time to add this to the ballot. And Kansas voters did get to speak because of that. So I think it's important that we not make a decision because of one particular governor. And so I support the overall bill because I think that this is something that needs to stand the test of time, and I do not support this sunset.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, Representative Hsu, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the discussion. This genuinely is not to do it with any one particular governor. Again, this is a brand new process, and then we're just trying to give ourselves a way out if it just practically doesn't work. We extend sunsets in this building all the time. You guys, I assume, will continue to have close to a supermajority, definitely a majority in the next election, after the next election as well, much to my chagrin. So if this does work and is to be expected, you can just extend the sunset. But if this doesn't work, you guys would have to vote to undo legislation that we did. This sunset just kind of prevents the need for us to do that. We can just kind of let it go away. So with that, I'll move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hsu to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Nays appear to have it. The nays do have it. The motion fails. We're back on the bill. Chair recognizes Representative Schlingensieben. Did a pretty good job on that one, didn't I, Representative?
Excellent, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question of the carrier of the bill? Did I hear you correctly earlier when we were discussing, I think, an amendment that you said one of the reasons or arguments against the governor selecting someone from the same party as the person to be replaced was not acceptable because that person possibly might not be in line with the prevailing party ideology? Is that what I understood?
Of the prevailing ideology of the incumbent, who is being replaced. That would be my point.
So would that person have to have been replaced from the same district as that particular?
It's not geographic, it's politics.
Thank you. Appreciate the response. I think all of us were elected by our districts, and as much as I appreciate party and understand its value and its importance, I think all of us are here to represent our districts. And personally, it doesn't matter which party it is, but the movement toward sort of ideological uniformity that seems to be all the rage these days, whether at the national level or the state, is something I find appalling. As a child, I had the great fortune of being able to travel almost every summer to Germany to visit my grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side were in communist East Germany, in the town of Naumburg. My sister would travel there from the time we were about 7 or 8 years old on the train. And it was quite an experience to travel across that border and see how things went from color to sepia tone. Because in communist East Germany, the coal has a lot of lignite in it. It's brown coal, they call it there. And so all of that dust out of the air settles down on everything, and even cherry blossom trees look gray and sandy. The reason I'm telling you this is because in communist East Germany, when they had elections, you only got to vote for the party slate that the party put forward. There were no opposition candidates. Everyone was forced to go to the elections, and they could only vote for those who were on the party slate. Now, my mother's father, who was a seminary professor and not a particular friend of the Communist Party, and who therefore repeatedly went to prison for Sunday sermons, he was sitting in his office one day refusing to go to the elections because he had no choice whether or not to go, but also because he had no choice for who to vote for. And so he sat in his study at home, and they sent 2 election officials to his house to force him to go vote. And so he welcomed them into his study, took the skeleton key, locked the door, and then threw it out the window and said, "We'll just sit here, gentlemen, because there's no point in our going." The point of all this is that there's really no purpose to this bill whatsoever, except that all we want to do is control some political ambitions that are currently in play, and we just can't have this particular governor having a decision in that matter, number one. And number two, we don't trust our own party members that she might choose, because we haven't cleaned out the party enough to make sure that everyone is ideologically conform. I can't believe, again, that I'm standing in the United States of America after coming to this country to experience this kind of nonsense. We are here to represent our people, folks, and we better get serious about it, even if our chances for re-election are slim if we don't conform to party loyalty. But this is a matter of conscience, friends. Think about it seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I ask a question of the carrier of the bill?
Yeah, sure.
So earlier you said the bill is timely because of the plane crash. Would you elaborate on that?
Yes, because the plane goes as a direct flight from Wichita to Reagan, which is the closest airport to the Capitol. A lot of our political, our senators, congressmen take that flight regularly. It's the best way to get from Kansas to DC.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion, Representative Wagner, you may close.
Thank you, colleagues, for the discussion and the debate. Appreciate the interest in this bill. Again, it's an important bill. Senate Bill 105 corrects oversights in current statute, provides appropriate checks and balances for the will of the people and the common sense of the legislature to not be thwarted by the unilateral action of any governor when making temporary appointments. I therefore urge your full support of this measure. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee rises and reports, that we report Senate Bill 105 as amended favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Wagner to report SB 105 as amended favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. This concludes our general orders. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Mr. Chair, I move we rise and report.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Motion passes.
Clerk will read.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole recommends that HB 2400 be passed, HB 2111, HB 2152, Senate Bill 14, Senate Bill 105 be passed as amended.
Speaker recognizes Representative Francis to adopt the committee of the whole report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion to adopt the committee of the report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion passes. You didn't need to do that, but. Reports of standing committee. Clerk will read.
The Committee on Legislative Modernization recommends SB 77 be passed. The Committee on Financial Institutions and Pensions recommends SB 139 be amended and the bill be passed as amended. The Committee on Financial Institutions and Pensions recommends SB 64 be amended and the bill be passed as amended. The Committee on Taxation recommends Senate Bill 35 as amended by Senate Committee of the Whole be passed. Your Committee on Calendar and Printing recommends on requests for resolutions and certificates that requests by Representative Potter Parshall, Woodard, Tarwater, Fairchild, Barrett, Bergkamp, Droege, Anderson, Poskin, Lewis, Collins, Osmond, Thompson, approved, and the Chief Clerk of the House be directed to order the printing of said certificates and order drafting of said resolutions.
Speaker recognizes the majority leader to adopt the calendar and printing report.
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of the calendar and printing report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Is there any objection to returning to that order of business, introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions? Seeing none, the clerk will read.
House Bill 2405 by Committee on Federal and State Affairs, requested by Representative Miller, an act concerning cannabis.
House Bill 2009 is withdrawn from Committee on Health and Human Services and referred to Committee on Interstate Cooperation. House Bill 2010 is withdrawn from Committee on Health and Human Services and referred to Committee on Interstate Cooperation. House Bill 2171 is withdrawn from the Committee on Interstate Cooperation and referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services. House Bill 2375 is withdrawn from the Committee on Health and Human Services and referred to the Committee on Interstate Cooperation. House Bill 2328 is withdrawn from the Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice and referred to Committee on Interstate Cooperation. Committee appointments. Representative Wanda Brownlee Page replaces Representative Angela Martinez on the House Committee on Judiciary on Monday, March 10th. This appointment expires at the end of the day on Monday, March 10th. On March 7th, Chief Clerk Susan Kennard delivered a complaint in accordance with Article 49 of the House Rules. The complaint in question was signed by Representative Leah Howe and names Representative Ford Carr as a respondent. Having reviewed the clerk's communications and attached a statement of the complaint, it conforms to the requirements of House Rule 4901. I hereby appoint, pursuant to House Rule 4902, the following House members to serve on the Select Investigating Committee. Representative Bob Lewis, Chair. Representative Susan Humphreys, Representative Shannon Francis, Representative Mike Amix, Representative Barbara Ballard, Representative Dan Osman. A copy of the signed complaint will be given to Chair Lewis, who will then proceed under House Rule to convene a committee and update its inquiry. Pursuant to House Rule 4902B, the Select Committee shall constitute an investigating committee and shall have the powers thereof under Article 10 of Chapter 46 of the Kansas Statutes Annotated. Rules and Journals Committee staff are assigned to assist. Are there announcements? Speaker recognizes Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will not be having a clear discussion, but for the CLEAR meeting, but all members of CLEAR can go down and get some Chick-fil-A. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a sign-up sheet for anybody looking or would like to sponsor recognizing, resolution recognizing March 13th, 2025 as Mental Health Advocacy Day. It'll be at my desk or in the Minority Leader's office immediately following session. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speaker recognizes Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democrats will have agenda tomorrow morning, 8:30, 152 South, 8:30. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker recognizes Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans Caucus will be meeting immediately after we're released. We have 2 speakers. Look forward to seeing you down there.
Speaker recognizes Representative Will Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Health and Human Services will meet today at 1:30. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shawnee County Delegation, we missed our meeting, but there's still some lunches out there, 281 North.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adjourn.
Republicans, we will calendar at 8 a.m. in the old Supreme Court tomorrow. For those, we have 92 RCPs for the OA lunch. We have about 80 that have paid, so if you haven't paid for your OA, please do so in 149 South. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Tuesday, March 11th at 11 a.m.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.